So good morning, my name is Peter Kelly, I'm Director of the Poverty Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you to the Poverty Alliance's Annual Conference 2020, title of which is Never the Same Again, Tackling Poverty After the Pandemic. And I think if you'd asked me at the start of the year what would be the focus of our annual conference, I probably would have said something along the lines of the Scottish elections in May 2021. But a lot has changed since the start of the year. And I think we've all become used to saying that we're living in unprecedented times, and there's no doubt that we are in unprecedented times. But I think for hundreds of thousands of people across Scotland and for millions across the UK, in fact, some things will feel very familiar. The constant pressure of living on a low income, the worry of being pulled further into poverty with the loss of a job, or of the struggle to access services that you need to get by. What will also be familiar, I think, to a lot of people is the sense of isolation and exclusion that's also a feature of poverty. But the pandemic has also shone a light on the reality of poverty in a way that perhaps hasn't been the case in the past. We've seen even more clearly how it affects people from BME communities, how women are at greater risk and disabled people are at greater risk of poverty. And I think the next wave of what's coming has highlighted the risk that low-paid workers, and in particular young workers, face in this pandemic. So that new light that's been cast on poverty and inequality, I think, suggests to us that there's a heightened awareness of poverty and the divisions in our society. And that's why the title of our conference today is Never the Same Again, with a very important question mark. The question is, I think, can we take this experience that we've had during the pandemic and make different decisions about our future? We're at a critical point where we've seen how much we all rely on each other. So now can we build on the solidarity and the compassion that we've seen to create a future that reflects those values? So our discussions today, we hope will help us chart a way forward. We're going to have three broad areas of discussion today during the conference. Hopefully they'll all go nice and smoothly from here on in. But the first session, which we're in just now, is looking at our experience during the pandemic. So we're going to be joined by some community activists that the Poverty Alliance has worked with for some time. And we're also really pleased to be joined by Aileen Campbell, the Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government. This session will run until 10:45, when we'll have a break. And we'll then go into workshops at 11 AM. It's important to say that our workshops are all separate. So if you haven't registered for one, you can still do so. You can go onto the Poverty Alliance website and find the links to register for the workshops. There are some really excellent speakers in our workshops. And then those will go on until 12:15. We'll have a lunch break, and we'll start back again with a final roundtable panel discussion with a range of really excellent speakers, a great way to finish the day. Again, if you haven't registered for that, there's still time. Registrations are open, and you'll find the links on our website. So I would ask Derek and Zahada now, if you could switch your cameras on. This has been a bit of a challenge for us this morning, so hopefully this is going to go well. Now what I want to do is really have a discussion with Derek and Zahada. We are supposed to be joined by one other colleague, Amanda Foster, but she's having some technical difficulties joining the call this morning. But what I'd maybe start with, if I maybe turn to you, Derek, first, maybe just tell us a wee bit about yourself, who you are, and how you got involved in some of the work of the Poverty Alliance.
Yeah, my name's Derek Kelter. I'm based here in sunny Motherwell. I've been involved in the disability community. Obviously, as a disabled person myself, I'm heavily involved. I have been for just under 40 years involved in the disability community. And up until 4 or 5 years ago, I worked within the voluntary sector. The last job I had was with a national charity, and my role was diversity and equalities manager. But unfortunately, in 2014, I acquired a brain injury, and kind of basically I lost my job, and I kind of obviously had to start a road of rehabilitation and get back into the community, you know. So that's basically kind of professionally, kind of leisure wise, you know, maybe something to do with the brain injury, but I'm a big part of social support. I've never recovered for that.
That's something that a few of us have never recovered from, unfortunately, Derek. I'm with you there. Zahada, it's really great that you can join us and share some of your experiences this morning, Derek. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Zahada, if I could maybe turn to you and just give us a wee bit of background about yourself, and again how you've managed to get involved with the Poverty Alliance.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Zahada. I'm a single parent with a disability, and my kids have both left school. One at university just started the last few weeks, and one at college. Yeah, I'm a single mum. Yeah, we have a lot of challenges in my life, but we still keep plodding on. That's the best way.
I think, how did you get involved with the Poverty Alliance, Zahada?
I got involved with Poverty Alliance through Glasgow Association of Mental Health, who have been supporting me for the last 2 or 3 years and also supporting my children. And I met Tamuchi through Glasgow Association of Mental Health. And I was poached, and yeah, ever since the beginning of the year, I've been an activist with Poverty Alliance. And it's come at a perfect time for me, and I'm looking forward to working with you guys. And the work we've already done has been absolutely amazing.
That's really good to hear, Zahada, and I think for us the importance of our memberships, Glasgow Association for Mental Health, one of our members as Glasgow Disability Alliance that Derek's involved with as well. If I could maybe turn to maybe some of the questions about how things, from your perspective, have impacted you during the pandemic, because that's what we really want to talk about in this first session, is what has been the impact on you, not just of the pandemic, but of, I guess, the response to the pandemic, all the measures that have been put in place to deal with that. Maybe again, if I just turn to you, Derek, what's been the big features for you?
I think the initial starting point was when the lockdown kicked in, you know, the kind of 23rd. At that juncture, I had 2 support workers who helped me kind of with independent living, and unfortunately, both of them were into lockdown. So I was faced with a scenario that I had no outlet to live independently, and primarily do kind of shopping, because where I live in Motherwell, you know, you're excluded if you live in a tower block for home delivery. So I then embarked on a kind of a frantic exploration to see whether there was help in the community to help me kind of plug the gap. Obviously, as a visually impaired person, I would find it hard to maintain social distance, but also as an asthmatic, I was fairly apprehensive about basically kind of travelling independent within, you know, the kind of the local area and the supermarket, etc., because I really wasn't confident in maintaining that kind of social distance. So it was fairly stressful and traumatic. I spent the best part of 9 weeks trying to find you know, an established, you know, provider in the area who would support me, basically effectively just to live independently, but then kind of shopping. That was harder than I thought. For 9 weeks, I failed to find anybody that would be able to support me. Obviously, the 1st of April, the Scottish Government brought in the helpline, but that was obviously inundated. So North Lanarkshire Council, despite having contacted them 3 or 4 times, they were unable to put support in place. And even though I was asthmatic, I wasn't deemed to be priority. So fortunately for me, because my links in the community, kind of local friends basically just started dropping off food parcels, which was great. But again, there's a challenge because of my visual impairment. It was a great wee game I had to play every lunchtime at dinner time, like guess the meal. It was difficult to negotiate. So it was really difficult early doors, and it was a struggle and a challenge to find access. But as I'll say later on, I kind of cracked it through kind of other avenues.
Yeah, and so that sense of isolation that I think many people would have felt in those early stages, really compounded by the fact that you couldn't get access to all the things that you needed as well. And Zahada, maybe if I come to you now, just same sort of question. You know, what were the kind of immediate impacts on you and your family, particularly in those early stages of the pandemic?
At the beginning of the pandemic, at the end of March, I think it was the 23rd of March as well, my son is a full-time student at college doing a HND. He got an email from his boss saying he's lost his job. That was vital income to my household. Like I say, I was a single parent on benefits because I've got a disability, and my two children, whom the eldest I didn't get any child benefit tax credits for. So his income from his part-time job was vital to my household. But out of the blue, we just lost that. We didn't have any other avenues to go down. So what happened is I had to resort to food banks. And when I went to explore for food banks, although it was greatly appreciated and they're delivered to my door and these were volunteers, what happened is we have a halal diet, so it didn't really cater for our diet. So eventually, speaking to Tamuchi, myself, she referred me to a third sector organisation who has been helping us with food vouchers ever since.
And maybe
that has been a great help for me and my family.
Thanks, Zahada. And I just wanted to ask one other thing before we move on to explore that wider issue that you both talked about in terms of the sort of community support. But you talked about Zahada, your son losing his job. What area? And he's a full-time student as well. But what kind of work did he do?
He's a waiter in a restaurant,
Right.
So it's the sector that's been affected the most, obviously.
Yeah. And that had a big impact on your family income.
On my family, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you both talked there a little bit about the kind of support that you were eventually able to access, but could you maybe say a wee bit more about what your sense of the wider impact in your community and you know, just in the places that you live or in the people that you know, just that what sense do you get? And Derek, again, if we go back to you.
I think I was fortunate to being a long-term member of a charity in Glasgow Disability Alliance, which is a user-led organisation. They ultimately were there, you know, kind of effectively to kind of pick up the pieces and help me get a more kind of, you know, kind of user-friendly, independent lifestyle. They listened to me. Obviously, you know, they contacted me to see if they could offer help. And I obviously kind of reiterated what I said earlier about the barriers I was experiencing. And I'd been a user-led organisation. They quite quickly provided a service that was fully inclusive, you know, in terms of help me live independently, accessing food, you know, kind of brands and, you know, types that I was familiar with. I could cook, I could recognise by touch or colour. So they were really good for that. And they also helped me, you know, link in with another community group who provided a volunteer who did my weekly shopping. So with that, I mean, GDA have that understanding, that zest, that drive. And it was really comforting after the chaos of the previous 9 weeks to kind of, you know, come across an organisation that were able to understand the kind of barriers And the good thing about that was always tapping into that meant that the social isolation element was alleviated because GDA were running various events, i.e. consultation, learning, etc. So that helped plug the gap and distract me as well. So
Yeah.
really, you know, the way forward for me, you know, in the initial 3 months was, you know, the invaluable support to get for a user-led organisation, and that's key.
Yeah, and so we'll come back to that bit on user-led, I think, but you obviously we're all connecting here digitally, and that's all pretty new for us. Was that an aspect that you needed or got support in as well, Derek? Or?
Yeah, it's thanks to Glasgow Disability Alliance, you know, that they furnished me not just with a laptop, but also the assistive technology, which is really, really expensive. Anybody that's familiar with assistive technology for somebody with visual impairment will know it's a program called JAWS. You know, it costs hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and a scanning piece of software that costs hundreds of pounds. So GDA helped me kind of acquire that, do a bit of learning on that. So that helped me kind of enhance my independent living skills and reach out and basically chap doors kind of daily to try and get support.
And Zahada, just to build on what you've been saying earlier, and I should say for all the participants in the conference, when Zahada mentioned Tamuchi's one of our colleagues at the Poverty Alliance, who works with a lot of our community activists. So, but Zahada, if you maybe just again said just your sense of, you know, you've been involved in other things in the community as well, just your sense of what the community response has been during the pandemic and how important that's been.
Yeah, I was introduced through a welfare rights officer to Glasgow Central Mosque, who started providing raw materials for meals, which did us for a couple of meals a week, which was a great help at the time. And during the month of Ramadan, they provided 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday evenings, they provided hot meals. So between the 3 of us, we got 2 hot meals delivered to our doorstep, which was also a great help feeding my children. I'm not too bothered about myself as long as my kids are fed. And another organisation I discovered by accident was food waste. Food that would normally go to landfill. You go and queue up. There's an organisation that rescues these from supermarkets and other outlets. They have a weekly meeting point, and you basically just go and queue up for several hours. It takes 2 to 3 hours of waiting time to wait for vegetables, fruit, bread, eggs, things like that, which is a staple for everybody's diet, really. And instead of it going to landfill, we rescue that and we actually use it, and it's great. And I'm a strong believer in no waste. Yeah. You know, and I think we all need to do our bit instead of wasting. And I've discovered apps as well on the phone that you can put any food that you don't want, you can put on the app and people take it from your doorstep. And I've just discovered that in this last month, and I've used it several times. And I've also given food away, which is it's a great way of getting to know your community, getting in contact with even your neighbours. You know, it's just staple stuff that fair enough you might not use, but it's vital to somebody else, and it's a great help to somebody.
So that's really helpful. Thanks, Zahada. What I want to do, because we've lost a wee bit of time at the start, but I want to just maybe finish with a question on what your hopes are, what you would like to see coming out of the pandemic, and some of the things that we've talked about so far about the importance of that kind of emergency response and the importance of communities and community organisations being there for people. But what in the longer term would you hope to see in place in terms of that, the kind of support that people need? Or you know, we've talked a little bit about the income that you lost during the pandemic, Zahada. What kind of things would you like to see in the future? Derek.
As a single parent, sorry, I'm going to go first here. As a single parent and with a disability, my tax credits and child benefit for both my kids was vital. 2019, I lost that for my son just before he started college. And with him losing his job in March and also another cut at the end of August with losing my daughter's tax credits and child benefit as she's gone on to university now.
Good.
I've had a huge impact on my family where all three of us are living on my benefits, which is my ESA. And this is the first time I've had a huge struggle in my life. Simple repairs in my house we can't get done. I've not had a toilet that's flushed in the last 6 months, and it's basically because we can't afford it. My bills and my food have to come first, so we're just improvising really. And the other thing I would really like coming forward out of this is some sort of guaranteed income for single parents, because we, like any other parent, would like our kids to do well, going on to college, university, and why shouldn't we have the same rights as anybody else? Why shouldn't our children be the next doctors, the politicians? They've got as much right as anybody else. So what I'm trying to say is, if we could get that little bit of help, continuing of our tax credits, child benefit, it would be a great help just now. I really would appreciate that. And I think other people as well. And people that are living in council houses, renting places, their housing benefit goes down when the child goes to college, university. And yet there's children at college doing non-advanced courses, like repeating their hires or doing a national certificate. Their child benefit tax credits continue, and yet we get penalised because our kids are doing that bit better.
So I think the key message coming out there, Zahada, is about that consistent support when your children are moving on to further education or university. And I think having that secure income is so important. I'm really conscious of time here, Zahada, sorry, and I want to bring Derek back in just for any final points from you as well, Derek.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points I'll just kind of quickly touch on. I may be wrong, but I just find it really surprised when we looked at prioritising support for groups in the community. The people like myself with visual impairment weren't prioritised. Bearing in mind what I said earlier about maintaining social distance is difficult, etc. I'm really surprised that the Scottish Government hadn't prioritised that. Kind of the key thing also that I would like to see, and again this is selfish, there needs to be more user-led groups for disabled people within individual communities. I'd love to have a GD in North Lanarkshire, and it would have taken away a lot of the tension and stress they've experienced. And finally, digital inclusion. That is key, pivotal. Without that, and without the support that I got for GD and the technology, which I touched on, is really expensive. Digital inclusion is pivotal in terms of helping disabled people, not just in these kind of these times, but in the future if things get better. It's key. And even though I'm using computers, I just really appreciate how much a contribution, access, digital inclusion really makes in terms of independent living.
Thanks very much, Derek. And I think both of you, and I know if Amanda had been able to join us, she would have reinforced these points as well. But I think both of you have really drawn out for us not only the real impact on your lives of the pandemic and the way that we've had to respond to it, but also that there are real practical, realisable options for making things better and different in the future. And I hope you've I think set the tone for our discussions today, and I really want to thank you for that, and actually to thank you both and Amanda as well for all the contributions that you've made to the Poverty Alliance, not just over the last year but over quite some time now. Really helps us, and I think really important that those voices are heard in these kind of forums. So thank you both very much. Now, notwithstanding all of our technical problems again this morning, I'm going to ask you both to switch off your cameras and to mute yourselves. Hopefully that will be a seamless process. And what I'm going to ask to do is if the Cabinet Secretary could turn on her camera now. It will hopefully work. Yes, it works, which is very pleasing that it works, I have to say. So let me just get that right. There we are. So again, my apologies to you, Cabinet Secretary, for the slight technical hiccups this morning. We should all be used to it by now, I think, after 6 or 7 months of Zoom calls, but there you go, it still caught us out. So let me just introduce the Cabinet Secretary for everyone before we get started. So Aileen has been an MSP since 2007, and since 2011 has been the MSP for Clydesdale. And over that time, Aileen's had a number of ministerial appointments covering local government, public health, children and young people. And since 2018, she's been Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government. And I think from the Poverty Alliance's point of view and from our members' point of view, one of the most critical parts of that role has been overseeing the implementation of the first child poverty delivery plan in Scotland, a really significant step forward, I think, for us in Scotland in terms of our fight against poverty and setting out a new direction for us. I'm really delighted that Aileen can join us today and share her experience and Scottish Government's experience of responding to the pandemic and trying to tackle poverty during the pandemic. So I'm going to turn over to Aileen now. I would encourage you again to use the Q&A function. We'll still have a little bit of time for questions to Aileen at the end. So I encourage you to get those questions into us, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible. Aileen, over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter. And yeah, I think we are slowly managing to get used to all these online ways of communicating and taking part in conferences and gatherings like this. So it's nice to be able to join everybody, and thank you particularly to Derek and Zahada for being so honest and sharing your experience of the pandemic. And it's always difficult for a politician to follow on a panel like this, as it highlights that no matter what I'm about to say and outline the actions that we've taken to date, that it's clear that there's still an awful lot still for us to be doing across government, local government and wider public life. But nonetheless, I think it underlines just the importance of ensuring that we continue to listen to the voices of experience to ensure that we're trying as best we can to get things as right as we can. So I don't think, though, there's ever been a year where Challenge Poverty Week has been so important. When we gathered together last year, I don't think any one of us could have imagined that in just a few short months from then that the world would be turned upside down with no life left untouched by this awful virus. But while all lives have been impacted, we know that not everyone has been affected in the same way, with those most vulnerable and those with least impacted the most. And again, we heard from Derek and Zahada just how harsh that has been. So we were told to stay home, to stay safe, which was of course easier if you had a safe and secure home to stay in. We had to homeschool, which was manageable if you had a computer and access to the internet. And folk were only allowed to venture beyond their homes once a day, which was a whole lot less painful if you had a garden for your children to play in. So the virus has shone a really uncomfortable spotlight on the deep inequalities in our society, and also the fragility of people's lives, which, if disrupted in some way, has often little resilience to fall back on. So what do we do about it, and what did we need to do going forward? So I want to talk through what the Scottish Government's response to the pandemic has been and the efforts of people and organisations right across the country. And also want to talk about our work for what's next and how we seek to not just recover from this, but to move forward and reform and renew what we do and not allow ourselves to slip back into the I-been mentality that has entrenched some of the inequality that we are talking about today. So at the start of the pandemic, government had to move quickly and it had to move swiftly. The unprecedented, that word unprecedented is one that we're often using at this moment. The unprecedented situation required unprecedented action, which saw us commit £350 million to enable local government, the third sector and community organisations to respond to the pandemic and support those in need. We were able to build on the existing infrastructure that we had in place to support people, such as the Scottish Welfare Fund, making a further £22 million available to local authorities immediately to meet increased demand. And in the period March to August, 41% more crisis grant applications were received than in the previous year, with awards totalling £9.4 million, showing how much that was needed. We're also able to make a one-off coronavirus carers allowance supplement payment of £230 in June, in addition to the regular 6-monthly carers allowance supplement. And that means that around 83,000 of Scotland's lowest income carers will receive an additional £690 this year on top of their carers allowance. And we provided £50 million of hardship funding to local authorities immediately to help them respond to the crisis and bolster local responses. And that has been met with further investment through consequentials of £155 million paid in June and £49 million for which distribution has now been agreed. And of course, and as we heard from Derek and Zahada, food security became a massive focus of our efforts. Access to food became a struggle for many through physically being unable to get out to purchase food and others being unable to afford it. That plus the disruption to the just-in-time food system through panic buying created a further challenge. And so we have so far made over £120 million available to tackle food insecurity resulting from the pandemic. We made £57 million available to local authorities to lead a coordinated local response to food insecurity, including extending the provision of free school meals for around 175,000 children and young people over the summer break. And we also established a national assistance helpline to make it easier for people to access support available, and councils working with local resilience partners, including third sector and community organisations, provided much needed assistance to people right across the country. And that includes providing people with cash payments where appropriate and providing person-centred support linking to advice services such as the Welfare Fund. And around £80 million of investment has been made available to support third sector and community organisations across the Supporting Communities Fund, the Wellbeing Fund and the Third Sector Resilience Fund. Through our Supporting Communities Fund, we made over £17 million available to 373 community anchor organisations, and that has enabled the funds to reach the many smaller community groups and mutual aid groups that would not otherwise have been able to access funding. And that has been an essential part of the response and our resilience in trying to tackle the pandemic. We've worked with national partners and a wide range of community networks, including the third sector interfaces and COSLA, to ensure that the fund reach communities in need right across the country. Community anchor organisations have supported a coordinated approach locally, working together with the public sector, local charities, third sector organisations, volunteers and communities of interest to helpfully avoid duplication and help channel support where it is needed. And through our Bid and Wellbeing Fund, we supported around 1,000 projects across Scotland, providing vital wellbeing support on issues such as physical and mental health and personal health. And we also provided over £22 million of funding through our Third Sector Resilience Fund to help organisations already delivering support to stabilise their incomes and manage cash flow challenges through these difficult times. And that investment helped to safeguard over 14,000 jobs and protect many valuable third sector partners. And as we transition from the emergency response phase into recovery and renewal, we're going to now focus the remaining funding across these three streams into a new £25 million community and third sector recovery programme, and hopefully that funding will support our third sector to continue in helping people and communities in the months ahead. So while the 6 months have been hugely traumatic, what we have seen in part as a result of the financial support provided has been inspiring. We have seen communities step up, volunteers offer their time in their thousands, and creativity and innovation amongst those helping those most in need. We provided over £1.5 million to third sector organisations to enable them to provide emergency hotel accommodation and support for people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness, including those with no recourse to public funds, where the public health crisis enabled more direct support to be made to this incredibly vulnerable group. And thanks to that rapid and coordinated response, 1,400 people previously sleeping rough or in unsuitable B&Bs or night shelters were supported into hotels and other self-contained accommodation, and all local authorities have now moved people staying in emergency accommodation into more suitable accommodation. So whilst there is so much positive work to be proud of, the crisis though has highlighted the failings of the systems which are meant to protect people. And at a time when social security was needed to provide a safety net, the damaging impacts of a decade of austerity and welfare cuts have been laid bare. With a £20 increase to personal allowance and universal credit, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation highlighted that families unable to work will on average receive £1,600 less per year in social security support than they would have done in 2011. And those with children will receive £2,900 less. So it's imperative that as we come to face the full economic impact of the pandemic, that these measures are strengthened and not removed. And taken away, that lifeline threatens to push a further 700,000 people into poverty right across the UK. And that's why we support the calls of organisations across the country to not only extend that £20 increase, but to expand it to people in receipt of benefits such as income support and employment support allowance, a step which it is estimated 3 million Scots would benefit from in 2021-22. So as we enter into further restrictions across the country tonight, I think it's also a timely reminder that we're not out of the woods yet with this pandemic, and the challenges have not gone. We're also entering the darker, colder, more expensive winter months, and the potential of a no-deal Brexit will cause significant uncertainty. And we need to meet these challenges with less money in the coffers. So it's critical that we continue to act quickly and support folk with employment and job opportunities. We've committed a £100 million package to support people looking for work or at risk of redundancy, and that includes £60 million for a youth guarantee to help prevent young people being locked out of the labour market. An initial £25 million National Training Transition Fund to provide retraining opportunities for people who have lost their jobs or are at risk of doing so, and £5 million to PACE to support individuals affected by redundancy. And in recognition that those that were furthest away from employment will find those opportunities even harder now, I announced a further £2.35 million for our Parental Employability Support Fund, enhancing the support available for both young and disabled parents to help them prepare for work and compete in the labour market, taking our investment this year to over £7.3 million. And importantly, that investment is also supporting increased capacity for pre-employment support for parents accessing early learning and childcare, is still set to double in funded hours, maximising the impact of this investment for parents. And we've also sought to rapidly increase efforts in tackling the digital divide through our Connecting Scotland programme. So working together with our partners and local authorities in the third sector, we've committed £43 million to help 50,000 people to get online by the end of 2021. The investment is important because it will provide a device, connection, but just not that, only that, it will provide training and support for individuals that had been previously excluded, with a strong focus on tackling poverty and disadvantage, particularly for households with children and for care leavers. And in August, we revealed the first disability benefit to be introduced using our new social security powers. Child winter heating assistance will ensure an extra £200 will go to families of the most seriously disabled children to help with their heating costs. Last month, we also announced our National Infrastructure Investment Plan, outlining plans to invest over £2.8 billion in capital and affordable housing over the next 5 years from 2021, an increase of 16% on current capital investment levels. And that's important given the central importance of affordable housing to tackle poverty. And just last week, we announced the new self-isolation support grant. This £500 grant, delivered through the existing Scottish Welfare Fund by our local authority partners, will support those who face losing income due to being asked to self-isolate, and applications are due to open next week for that. These actions, though, building on the £1.96 billion of investment targeted at low-income households last year, are in addition to the new Scottish Child Payment, which will open for applications for eligible children under 6 next month, with the first payment to be made from the end of February. And despite the challenges faced due to coronavirus, we have prioritised this payment, and the introduction of this new benefit has been delayed by only 2 months. But it's a significant achievement and highlights our ongoing commitment to tackling child poverty. So together with existing support offered through the Best Start grant and Best Start Foods, This will provide up to £5,200 for eligible families by the time their first child turns 6, and that's around £4,000 more than is available elsewhere in the UK. So while endeavouring to continue to meet the challenge of the pandemic and work out our immediate recovery plans, what is also clear is that we cannot revert back to the old ways of doing things. We have to recognise that the system has failed too many, and tinkering around the edges won't suffice. The last 6 months have also taught us that partnership, trusting and empowering our communities, focusing on person-centred approaches are and can be transformative. We recognise that we need to capture the policy and practice changes we have seen and build from that and change the system. We've also reconvened the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Advisory Board to identify ways to learn from the pandemic and build improvement, and yesterday we published our Ending Homelessness Together action plan. And we've also set up the Social Renewal Advisory Board, which is providing independent advice to support us to overcome the challenges presented by COVID and help drive progress towards a fairer, more equal Scotland. The board, which is receiving input from experts across a wide range of interests and importantly embeds the voices of lived experience of poverty, has recently opened a call for ideas, seeking input from groups and organisations on the lessons learned through the pandemic response and the ideas they have from what that experience needs us to do to change the system as a result. So this call for ideas is open till the 23rd of October, and I would certainly encourage anyone in this conference to consider what you can do to contribute. And then amongst the challenge, there is a chance to help reshape Scotland, to learn from the crisis and deliver the change needed to tackle poverty and advance equality. So life continues to be a struggle, and it sometimes feels tough to think about grandiose ideas of renewal when in the here and now folk are struggling and will face further restrictions as of tonight. But the need for change is pressing, and if we don't get set about making that change now, then when do we do it? Opportunity is there for us. The way we live and will have to live for some time in Scotland has possibly and probably changed forever. So we need to learn those lessons of what worked over the last 5 or 6 months. And for me, those have been that partnership working, trusting and empowering our communities, empowering people and individuals by adopting dignified approaches and solutions through, for instance, getting money into people's pockets. And we also need to think about how we shift what we value as a society and make sure that we prioritise that collectively in the right way. So there is clearly lots that has been done. There's lots though still to do, and the challenges seem to never go away. But again, and as ever, I think the key to navigating through that is working in partnership and working together. And if any country can do that, I think our country can, if we continue to ensure that we do that in partnership, that we continue to have the open dialogue and we continue to learn from one another. Sally Thomas from the Scottish Federation of Housing Association gave me a phrase which I think is really apt for how we need to approach things going forward, and that's about having no egos, no silos and no logos. And for me, that underlines the importance of just continuing to work together to try and create the country that I think we all want to see. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions, which I see are starting to appear on the chat bar.
Thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary. And yes, the questions are starting to come in. You've given us, I think, a lot to think about there, and a lot to, I think, hope in terms of your phrase about not wanting to tinker with systems that weren't delivering for people. I think is something that people who are attending the Poverty Alliance conferences and events will absolutely identify with, that we need to redesign some of the systems that have let people down so badly up until now. I'm going to try and pick some of the questions. Let's see, because they're coming in both in the chat and the Q&A, which makes life a wee bit more difficult. But just maybe to pick up on that point that you finished with towards the end there about collaboration and working together. What is it that will, so Martin Dorchester asked the question, what is it that can help us move towards that more structural approach to working together, to true collaboration, to achieve the kind of structural change that we need? What are some of the things that perhaps coming out of the pandemic that we've learned about what works in that respect about working together?
Yeah, and I think Martin's point is a valid one, and I think it probably reflects the experience that Derek talked about how at the point of the pandemic, what stepped back from him was some of the statutory services, and what stepped up for him was the community response. So we need to kind of think through how do we value the third sector? How do we ensure that the third sector is not an add-on, which I think is what Martin has put in his comments, and that has to be something that we need to do across government. So I know that my portfolio has explicit responsibility for the third sector, but the whole of government has an interface with the third sector organisations, and whether or not exclusively right across the government we treat the third sector with the respect it requires is something that we need to work harder at. But I think there's also questions for local government and for the NHS and wider public life as well. For me in my own constituency, sometimes it feels like, and I've used this phrase for the third sector, it feels like it's often at the coos tail of funding decisions. Once the big strategic decisions have been made, whatever's left tends to be the thing that's parcelled up to the third sector, and that's not right, because actually what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 months is that those community-based responses, those volunteers, those third sector groups that have acted with agility have been the thing that have enabled people to withstand the worst impact of the pandemic. And one anecdote that I heard, which has stuck with me, was from social workers who had said to me that they had real concerns about some families that they had a bit of an eye on, but were actually immensely surprised by the resilience, because what they were accessing was support through community groups, which was non-stigmatising and was much more fleet of foot. And so there has to be a big lesson there. There is also a big saving for public life as well, because that has avoided then going into social work, much more costly, much more expensive, much more costly to the individual family as well. So there has to be a collective rethink, and I hope that that is where the Social Renewal Advisory Board gets its teeth into and gives us some pretty kind of hard challenges about how we once and for all shift this, because none of it's new. I think that's the thing that we're all recognising. None of the solutions to this are new. It's what Christy talked about 10 years ago. It's what the bread and butter of the third sector and your organisation have been talking about long and weary. So, you know, again, if not now, then when? And we need to just bite the bullet. And there's opportunity. The election manifesto is getting drafted, and there's lots of decisions to be made. So we need to use that.
And maybe just to follow up that, excuse me, that question around funding and being at coos tail, as you said, one of the things that we've seen, obviously, during the and you mentioned it in your speech, is the additional support that was made available for the third sector, and a lot of organisations have benefited from that, and that money has gone straight out to people, and that's been really welcome. But I think one of the other impacts, and one of our participants raised this, is that many charities have lost the opportunity to fundraise in the way that they would have done. So they've lost sources of income, maybe through social economy projects that they might run as well, where they might have had income. And you know, what is there a likelihood, and I know you've already mentioned that budgets are undoubtedly going to be tight, but what is the likelihood that there might be additional resources available for organisations in the future?
So so I know this is part of the answer, I guess, which was the fact that the money that was kind of left across the different funds, we kind of tried to bring it together to then provide some additional support for the third sector community groups going forward. And I know that there will have been reservations about the advisory group on economic recovery. I know that there will have been lots of people maybe feeling that it didn't quite work for them. But one of the positives, I think, has been that there was a very explicit mention of the need to recognise the third sector in that, and to look at innovative funding models. And so we're working through those recommendations to try and work through what we can do. Now, some of it might not be the usual ways in which we have provided support, but we have to be creative and we have to be innovative. And actually, the whole host of ways that we got money out the door wouldn't have worked had we not been working with the third sector itself. So it was the Just Enterprise, First Port, Cora, whole gambit of organisations that helped us, because they provided a bit of creativity about how you got the money out the door, and that creativity is going to be essential. And but I have to be upfront and frank. Things aren't going to be easy, and not everybody can be helped, and that's the painful thing. So it's tough, it's difficult, and it's not where any of us want to be.
I think it's important to have that realism about the moment that we're in and the period that we face ahead of us. We know that with furlough still looks to be withdrawn the end of October, despite the situation that we're in, and not just in Scotland but right across the UK, and we are clearly facing a really difficult time, which I guess in that context makes some of the powers that we have in Scotland, some of the approaches that we've taken in Scotland, all the more important. So the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment, has been really important, slightly delayed. I mean, there is a question about, is there something that we can do for families whose children are over 6, whether there might be additional payments that could be made there. There's a question come in as well around, now I've lost it, sorry. I'm
trying, it's difficult to connect, there's so many coming in.
There are so many.
I mean, I guess the other thing is, if we don't have time to get to them all, we can make sure that we try and find some way to get answers back.
Yeah, there's a question, so it does go to the kind of issues around benefits, and again mentioned the top up to carers allowance supplement, and there's a question I think might be from Jamie Livingston, but I can't see the full name, asking whether there might be a possibility to have another top up, in that way, sort of not looking to try and do things quite differently again in the future, and to look at building that support for carers, which again we've seen throughout the pandemic has been so absolutely crucial. And I'll try and come back to some of those other questions once I get to them.
Yeah, so we recognise the challenge that carers were going to be facing, particularly, and that's why my colleague Shirley-Ann Somerville mentioned some of the additional support during the course of the pandemic, and it will be continue to be difficult, and we probably do need to think through what else and what more can be done. But I would also just say that we're trying to do this with less money now, and that's going to cause us significant challenge. But we need to be open to ideas. That's the reason why we're looking to folk to feed in their thoughts and their ideas about what needs to happen going forward, which is why the call for has gone out from the Social Renewal Advisory Board, and it's also why we need to do more with the money that we do have. So I think there's far more that we should be and could be doing, and we've had discussions with Fiona Hislop about some of the employability funding going out. Why is it then that part of my portfolio has to try and work out how we support people who are furthest away from the job market, and why is that not just something that happens as a standard? And I think those are the discussions that we need to be having, is making sure that that whole employability landscape understands that one of the best ways that we can help try and tackle poverty is by ensuring that we've got good jobs for everybody, and that people have support where they're furthest away from it, and that support needs to be sort of mainstreamed. And I think so. It's not a kind of easy answer, but I think there is much more that we need to be doing to press for more outcomes from the money that we do have, and make the whole system work better. So as opposed to kind of leaving it as pockets of pilots round about.
Yeah, and I think maybe just a couple of other points building on that. How do we get beyond pilots? So there's a few questions, and I think your suggestion that maybe we should gather these questions, because they all will be captured, and some of them will probably require a bit more reflection. I think there's some questions around the Sustainable Development Goals and how we actually make some of those targets in the National Performance Framework a bit more alive and at the community level. So I think that's important, about how we translate some of the very important goals that we've set at Scottish Government level into meaningful ways of working at the local level. There's also a couple of questions which around basic income, and whether that kind of approach is required. Be good to get maybe some of your thoughts around that. There's also another question here, which I'm going to try and take together with the universal basic income, is around transport costs. Transport is obviously taken a significant hit during the pandemic, but there's still, and in recovery, I think public transport will be more important than ever. And someone here is asking for your thoughts on free universal transport. I should say that Poverty Alliance, one of the things that we've been calling for is the extension, or the Scottish Government is looking at free transport for younger people and looking to extend that up to 25 and to people who are on universal credit. So just as one of those sort of system-wide approaches that would look to support people, your thoughts on universal basic income and a universal approach to transport?
Yeah, we have we've done a lot of work. So the citizens' basic income is something that has been thought about by the Scottish Government for some time, and there had been 4 authorities that had been funded to try and work through the feasibility and develop ways in which that could work. Unfortunately, it came up against the buffers when a lot of it will require the interplay and the cooperation of the DWP, but it's something that is probably become much more relevant now because of the pandemic than it maybe had been at the point in time which we were running those feasibility. So it's still a good idea, it's still a brilliant idea, it's just that it requires us to have the full cooperation from the UK government and the DWP in particular, and as yet I don't think that's where they are, but you know, I know that there's lots of push for it down at Westminster, so we'll consider to kind of think through that. But there might be other ways in which we can be doing and looking at that minimum incomes, you know, all the other things that might be within our gift. And transport has been continually been one of the frustrations and that people face, a real barrier. And I know that there's work underway to consider the extension of concessionary travel to those under the age of 26, and there has been thinking through about how that might happen. And I can now, who is it that's raised that? Is that Martin again? It's a universal problem regardless of where you live in the country. I have a rural constituency, and it means that there are not many options for public transport, and it becomes much more isolating when suddenly you're told that you can't travel very far and you have to avoid public transport. Well, you don't have many options unless you car share, but we're also telling folk not to car share as well, and so it becomes really, really challenging for people as well. And I have had constituents who suddenly can't access their money because somehow there has been a break in the system, which means they don't have the change, so they can't get on the bus and they can't access their money. So again, it just kind of points to the fragility of people's lives. So there is much more we need to do. But I also think, though, there has to be a way that we think through that and think through the opportunities of what's happened over the last 5 or 6 months, where more people we see are living locally. Far more people are using what's on their high street and connecting back to where they are. And we've set out in our programme for government the 20-minute neighbourhood idea, which is to try and make sure that people have access to the things they need as close as they can to where they live, which should be something that enables people to not necessarily always require transport to get wherever they need to go. It's not going to take it away, but it might make it easier. The thing that I need to think through, though, is what does that mean for somebody like Derek, who has a visual impairment, and a 20-minute neighbourhood just might not work for him because he still requires that, you know, a lot of support to try and get out and about and access and navigate the location around him. So again, that underlines the need for us to continue to work with people with lived experience to test out these notions, to test out these ideas, and make sure they work it in practice.
Absolutely, and I think again, really, really good to hear both that reinforcement of the need to involve people with experience of poverty and all these different levels. And I think that was one of the points that came through from Derek as well. It's not just at Scottish Government level, it's having those effective mechanisms for involvement at different levels of government as well. There's also some points here around, I guess, around the fair work piece as well, about what Scottish Government can maybe do to try and reduced reliance on 0 hours contracts, which I think, again, we've seen many people paying a price for that. There's also, I've lost it again, a question from Save the Children around support over the October holidays and Christmas holidays. And I guess that's, again, thinking about how we use some of our powers. There's also a question came in around taxation powers, about what is there more that we can do with the levers that we have in Scotland, even in these difficult times. So a specific one on, is there additional support that could come through in the holidays to help these really critical times when families are going to struggle?
Yeah, and we're trying to see, is it clear, Tel, for this?
Yeah.
We're trying to kind of actively consider all of these things because we know that we're coming into months that are far more challenging, and maybe in many respects, with hindsight, the longer days, the warmer weather of the summer and spring had made the whole pandemic just a little bit easier. I'm not pretending it was easy, but it made it a wee bit easier, and we're now coming into the harder, harsher, colder weathers. We've already announced money to try and help tackle fuel poverty. I see Neil from Wormworks has also added a comment there as well. So fuel and food are things that we're actively looking at the moment to work out what can we do and how can we improve it going forward. And I think food, though, is one of these things, again, that we're going to need to think about that whole system, you know, the just-in-time system. You know, people started to buy a bit too much in the way of pasta and tins of tomatoes and toilet roll, but that was fine if you could afford to do that, but it left it pretty difficult if you couldn't. And it has also shown up, you know, I think Zahada was talking about that food waste, you know, the fact that we've got food waste as well as part of our food system, built into our food system, seems ridiculous. So I think all these things are going to need to have a bit more of a close look at it going forward. And there was another issue you mentioned, I know what I was going to talk about, was the existing levers that we've got to try and make the systemic change. So again, this is something that has been talked through at the advisory board as well, but also within our programme for government, we've committed to embedding the community wealth building approach, which has been adopted by North Ayrshire, a much more mature space in North Ayrshire, across the other Ayrshires, across that region. But how do we use that as the approach going forward? So that's about then having a much steelier look at procurement, where the money in the system is, who gets access to it, is it actually delivering for the community, how do we tackle the wealth in the system, yeah. and how do we avoid that, I think what Neil McEnroy from would describe as that extractive economic model, and how do we make sure that what we build going forward enables everybody to benefit from the resource and the capital that's in the system going forward. Again, though, some of that's not new. Some of this is the stuff that has been talked about, but now I think we do have a chance to kind of push it, because there's no any place to go. There's no grass to further kick things into. We've got limited resource now, so yeah, we're going to have to think collectively across the whole of government to try and unlock some of that.
I'm going to finish with just one question from myself, because we've got so many questions here, and I think your suggestion that we try and gather some of those together, and we'll talk to officials. So Andrew, you'll be hearing from us.
Andrew will be delighted.
But I think there's also there's quite a number of ideas in there that could maybe contribute to the consultation that's going on just now. But I just wanted to maybe ask, out of all of this, out of what you've seen, the government response, the community response, and so on, what is it that gives you hope that we can genuinely build back better? What is the thing that you would like to leave the audience with just now that says, yeah, things can be better than they've been in the past?
It's really difficult. I think the partnership. I think we've got incredibly good partnership now embedded across, between ourselves, local government, between ourselves and third sector organisations, between ourselves and TSI network or whatever. I think we've got far more partnership or embedded and stronger, a mature partnership that means that we have folk giving me a call if things are not going the way they need it to be, or getting in touch with the officials that are in the government, that we have those relationships, that we can call it out if things aren't working, that we can really use the expertise that others have across the country to help us out. For me though, that then suggests that government needs to understand that we can't do it all ourselves. We can't do it, and nor should we try to, and that everybody across public life needs to take a step back and recognise that none of them either can do this on their own, and that we have enormous assets in our community that once they've been supported can help us. And we need to, and I think I need to make the point to my other colleagues that at the point of the pandemic, my portfolio was the one that needed that extra boost of funding to help the country recover, and that meant it had to be about supporting community, supporting the third sector, and working as locally as we can to support the resilience of the country. Now we've got that there, we see people's appetite for doing that, and we need to then support that and ensure that that's the thing that's used going forward, that we don't revert back to wanting to keep a hold of things and to being precious about things. And again, that's why that phrase that Sally Thomas provided me with, no egos, no logos, no silos, is so important. But that also has to be two-way as well, and that those same issues of protective behaviour, preciousness can be applied across the board. So we just need to, I think, take a deep breath, roll up our sleeves and work on tackling the task in hand. That's what we saw over the pandemic, and I just think we probably don't always want a pandemic to prompt that behaviour, but now that we know we can do it, we can build from it, and we can make sure that the country can recover in a stronger way going forward. And I think, again, you know, we've said it often, a country of 5 million like Scotland, with those deep connections and that partnership there, I think there's a lot to be hopeful about going forward. And other countries tell us that what we have is quite special, and probably we need to just remember that that's what we've got here and we can build from it.
Yeah, great. I think it's important in these really, really difficult times to have some sense of positivity and some hope for the future. And I think you're right, we do have a lot of resources, we have a great deal of challenges coming ahead of us, no doubt about that, but I think it is it's the kind of networks and the organisations and the people that are involved that will make a difference. And I just want to finish by thanking you for your contribution this morning, Cabinet Secretary, and also for your support throughout the week for Challenge Poverty Week. We know that it's been perhaps against my own expectations, really vibrant, really positive, and really shown, I think, the strength of feeling around really making a big step forward in tackling poverty in Scotland. So thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Thank you.
Everyone else.
Join you next year's Challenge Poverty Week as a CABSEC, so maybe just need to stay in touch with everybody. Thank you for your week and all the effort that's been gone into the week, and for all of you that Challenge Poverty Week is a 52-week endeavour, so thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the workshops.